The gunshot echoed across the valley, sending a flock of startled birds into the crisp Montana sky as Zara Henderson clutched her 5-year-old son Thomas to her chest, whispering urgent prayers into his fever-hot hair. The stagecoach robbery had left them stranded, their belongings scattered across the dusty trail, and her husband's blood soaking into the parched earth of the frontier, another casualty of the unforgiving West in the summer of 1879. "Mama, I'm scared," Thomas whispered, his small body trembling against hers as they huddled behind a boulder, listening to the bandits' horses gallop away with the last of their money and hopes. "Hush now," Zara murmured, her widow's grief pushed aside by a mother's determination. "We're going to be just fine." But Thomas wasn't fine. He hadn't been fine since the scarlet fever had swept through their Chicago neighborhood last winter, leaving him weak and breathless where once he'd been robust and lively. The doctor had suggested the clean mountain air might restore his health, advice that had led her husband Gregory to purchase land near a growing settlement called Pine Ridge. Now Gregory was gone, and Zara was alone with a sickly child, miles from civilization. "Can you walk a little more, my brave boy?" she asked, helping Thomas to his unsteady feet. His legs, once plump with childhood vigor, had grown thin as reeds. His chest heaved with the effort of standing. "I'll try, Mama," he said with a determination that broke her heart. They walked until the sun hung low in the western sky, casting long shadows across the trail. Thomas stumbled more frequently as daylight waned, and when he fell for the third time, Zara knew they couldn't continue. She spotted a grove of cottonwoods near a creek and led him there, setting up a makeshift camp with nothing but her shawl and what little they'd salvaged from the robbery. That night, as Thomas slept fitfully beside her, Zara stared at the stars and wondered if they'd made the worst mistake of their lives coming west. The land was beautiful but brutal, promising both abundance and death in equal measure. With Gregory gone, there would be no one to build their homestead, no one to plow fields or raise barns. Just a city-bred widow with soft hands and a son who struggled to breathe after the slightest exertion. "We should have stayed in Chicago," she whispered to the night. Morning brought no relief. Thomas's fever had risen, and his lips had taken on a bluish tint that frightened her more than the bandits had. Zara gathered him in her arms, her muscles screaming in protest as she carried him down the trail. He was light, too light for a boy his age, but still heavy for her slender frame. By midday, the weight had become unbearable. Her vision swam with exhaustion, and each step felt like walking through deep mud. When she heard the sound of approaching hoofbeats, fear and hope warred in her chest. They could be the returning bandits, or they could be salvation. The rider who appeared around the bend was neither bandit nor angel, but a man astride a chestnut stallion that gleamed like polished copper in the sunlight. He wore a battered hat pulled low over his eyes, and a week's worth of stubble darkened his jawline. Dust covered his denim and leather, telling the tale of many miles traveled. "Madam?" he called, slowing his horse. "You all right there?" Zara stood rooted to the spot, her arms tightening around Thomas. "We were robbed," she said, her voice cracking. "My husband. They shot him. My son needs help." The stranger dismounted in one fluid motion, his spurs jingling as his boots hit the dirt. He approached slowly, hands visible at his sides like he was approaching a spooked mare. Up close, his eyes were the color of the Montana sky, crinkled at the corners from years of squinting into the sun. "Name's Caleb Ward," he said, reaching to tip his hat. "Ranch foreman at the Triple Diamond, just over that ridge." He nodded toward a distant hill. "Let me help you get the boy somewhere safe." "Zara Henderson," she replied, relief making her knees weak. "This is Thomas." Caleb touched the back of his hand to Thomas's forehead, his weathered face growing serious. "He's burning up. My horse can carry you both to the ranch." "The boss's wife was a nurse during the war, she'll know what to do." Zara hesitated only a moment before nodding. Caleb lifted Thomas from her arms with a gentleness that belied his rough appearance, settling the boy in the saddle before helping Zara up behind him. He took the reins and led the horse on foot, setting a brisk pace toward the ranch. "You from back east?" he asked after they'd walked in silence for a while. Chicago, Zara confirmed. My husband bought land near Pine Ridge. We were going to start a new life. Caleb nodded, his expression unreadable. Pine Ridge is still a good day's ride from here. Triple Diamond's closer. You can get your boy well before deciding what comes next. The ranch appeared as they crested a hill, a sprawling complex of buildings nestled in a valley with mountains rising majestically behind it. Cattle dotted the pastures, and smoke rose from the chimney of a substantial main house. It was larger than Zara had expected, a testament to the success of whoever owned it. Mrs. Adelaide Thornton, the ranch owner's wife, took charge the moment they arrived, directing Caleb to carry Thomas to a guest room while she gathered medicines and cleaned linens. Zara followed, explaining Thomas's history with scarlet fever and the journey that had brought them to Montana. You poor dears, Adelaide said, her capable hands already at work bathing Thomas's face. Charles will send men to recover your husband's body and your belongings. In the meantime, you'll stay with us until the boy is well. For 3 days, Thomas hovered between consciousness and delirium, his small body fighting a battle that seemed far too large for him. Zara rarely left his side, sponging his brow and coaxing sips of broth and medicine into him when he was lucid enough to swallow. Caleb visited each evening after his work was done, bringing small gifts: a wooden horse he'd whittled, a book of adventure stories, a jar of honey from the ranch's beehives. He would sit quietly in the corner of the room, hat in his hands, asking about Thomas's condition and offering words of encouragement. He's a fighter, Caleb observed on the 4th evening, watching Thomas sleep more peacefully than he had since their arrival. Reminds me of a colt I once raised. Everyone said he was too weak to make it, but he grew into the finest cutting horse in the territory. He was strong before the fever, Zara said, her fingers absently stroking Thomas's hair. He could run for hours, climb trees faster than squirrels. He will again, Caleb said with such conviction that Zara found herself believing him. Western air and good food will put the strength back in his bones. On the morning of the 5th day, Thomas's fever broke. By afternoon, he was sitting up, asking questions about the ranch and the horses he could see from his window. The blue tinge had left his lips, replaced by a healthy pink that made Zara want to weep with relief. Mama, can I go outside? He asked, his eyes brighter than they'd been in months. Not just yet, my love, she said, smoothing his blankets. A few more days of rest first. But Thomas grew restless as his strength returned, and it was Caleb who suggested a compromise. How about I bring a gentle mare right up to the porch? He offered. The boy can pet her, get to know her a bit. It'll be good for his spirits. Adelaide agreed it might help, and so the next day, Caleb appeared leading a dappled gray mare with a kind and patient demeanor. Thomas was bundled in blankets on the porch swing, his face lighting up at the sight of the horse. This here's Daisy, Caleb said, bringing the mare close enough for Thomas to reach out a tentative hand. She raised 12 foals in her time, so she's got a mothering nature about her. Thomas stroked Daisy's velvet nose, giggling when she snuffled against his palm. She likes me. Course she does, Caleb said with a wink at Zara. Horses can tell good people from bad faster than most humans. For the next week, Caleb brought Daisy to visit every day, each time staying a little longer to tell Thomas stories about life on the ranch. Zara watched her son transform under the cowboy's attention, hanging on every word and asking endless questions about horses, cattle, and the ways of the West. Meanwhile, Charles Thornton had sent men to Pine Ridge with the deed to Gregory's land, discovering that it was prime property near the growing town worth considerably more than Gregory had paid for it. When Zara learned this, she felt a glimmer of hope for their future. You could sell it, Adelaide suggested one evening as they sat on the porch, watching Caleb show Thomas how to brush Daisy. Take Thomas back east where there are proper doctors and schools. Zara considered it, watching her son laugh as Caleb demonstrated how to check a horse's hooves. Thomas's cheeks had filled out during their stay at the Triple Diamond, and color had returned to his face. He breathed easier in the mountain air, just as the Chicago doctor had predicted. "I'm not sure the East is home anymore," she admitted. "Gregory believed in this new start, and I'm beginning to see why." 2 weeks after their arrival, Thomas was deemed well enough for short outings. Caleb appeared at the house early one morning, leading not only Daisy but also a small, gentle pony. "Thought the young man might like to try sitting on Clover here," Caleb said, his eyes seeking Zara's permission. "I'll lead her, and he'll be safe as can be." Thomas's pleading look was impossible to resist. Zara nodded, and Caleb lifted Thomas onto the pony's back, showing him how to hold the reins and sit properly. They walked slowly around the ranch yard, Thomas beaming with pride while Zara hovered nervously nearby. "Look, Mama! I'm riding!" Thomas called, his voice stronger than she'd heard it in nearly a year. "You're a natural, son," Caleb said, the words slipping out so naturally that neither he nor Thomas seemed to notice its significance. But Zara noticed, and something shifted in her heart as she watched this kind, patient man teaching her boy with the same care he might have shown his own child. As Thomas grew stronger, the riding lessons became a daily ritual. Caleb taught him to guide Clover with gentle pressure from his legs, to speak soothingly when she was nervous, to thank her with pats and treats for her cooperation. Thomas soaked up the knowledge like parched earth absorbing rain, his confidence growing alongside his strength. "Mama says my papa was a good rider," Thomas told Caleb one afternoon as they brushed down Clover after a lesson. "Is that so?" Caleb asked, glancing at Zara, who stood watching from the fence. "He rode in the park in Chicago every Sunday," Thomas continued. "But he never taught me because I was too little." "Well, you're not too little anymore," Caleb said, handing Thomas a currycomb. "And you're learning faster than most grown men I've taught." Thomas beamed at the praise. "When I grow up, I want to be a cowboy like you, Mr. Caleb." "You can call me Caleb, son," the cowboy said, ruffling Thomas's hair. "And I reckon you'd make a fine cowboy someday." Later, as Caleb walked Zara back to the main house, he apologized. "Didn't mean to overstep with the son business. It just came natural like." "You didn't overstep," Zara assured him. "Thomas needs a man to look up to, and you've been so good with him." Caleb's eyes met hers, and for a moment Zara forgot to breathe. "And what about you, Mrs. Henderson? What do you need?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with possibilities neither was ready to name. Zara looked away first, her cheeks warming. "Time, I suppose? To figure out what comes next." Caleb nodded, respecting her answer. "Time we've got plenty of. Nobody's rushing you off the Triple Diamond." Indeed, the Thorntons had made it clear that Zara and Thomas were welcome to stay as long as they needed. Charles had even suggested that if Zara decided to keep Gregory's land, he could help her find good men to build a proper house and outbuildings on it. "You wouldn't have to work the land yourself," he'd explained. "Could lease most of it to neighboring ranchers, keep a garden and some chickens, maybe a milk cow. Enough to live comfortably without killing yourself with work." It was a generous offer, and practical too. But as July turned to August, Zara found herself reluctant to leave the Triple Diamond, not just because of the security it offered, but because of the tall cowboy who had become such an important part of their lives. Caleb had started taking Thomas on longer rides, always careful to keep the boy's still recovering strength in mind, but pushing him just enough to build his endurance. Thomas returned from these outings flushed with excitement, full of stories about deer they'd spotted or how Caleb had shown him to read tracks in the dirt. "And Caleb says when I'm stronger, he'll teach me to rope," Thomas announced one evening at dinner, nearly bouncing in his seat with anticipation. "That sounds wonderful," Zara said, smiling at her son's enthusiasm while wondering if they would still be at the Triple Diamond when that day came. Later that week, after Thomas was asleep, Zara found Caleb sitting alone on the porch steps, smoking a cigarette and gazing at the stars. She hesitated, then sat beside him, drawing her shawl tighter against the evening chill. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything you've done for Thomas." Caleb extinguished his cigarette. "No need for thanks. He's a good boy." Smart, too. He worships you, Zara said softly. You've given him something I couldn't, confidence in his own strength. You gave him life, Mrs. Henderson, and kept him alive through sickness and hardship that would have broken many a grown man. Don't sell yourself short. The quiet sincerity in his voice touched her deeply. Zara, she said. Please call me Zara. He smiled, the moonlight catching in his eyes. Zara, he repeated, as if testing how it felt on his tongue. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, distant lowing of cattle, the occasional nicker from the horses in the corral, the soft hooting of an owl hunting in the nearby forest. What was your husband like? Caleb asked finally. The question surprised her, but Zara found she didn't mind it. Gregory was kind. Ambitious. He worked as a bookkeeper for a shipping company in Chicago, but he always dreamed of something more. When he read about the land opportunities out west, he couldn't talk of anything else. He sounds like a good man. He was, Zara agreed. He loved Thomas fiercely. When Thomas fell ill, Gregory took on extra work to pay for doctors and medicines. That's what wore him down, made him susceptible when the fever came through again this spring. Caleb nodded, understanding dawning on his face. So it wasn't just Thomas who was sick? No. Gregory recovered, but it left him weakened. The doctor said the journey west might be good for both of them. Zara wrapped her arms around herself, fighting back tears. Instead, it killed him. Without hesitation, Caleb put his arm around her shoulders, offering wordless comfort. Zara leaned into his strength, allowing herself to grieve in a way she hadn't been able to while focusing on Thomas's survival. It wasn't your fault, Caleb said gently. Stagecoach robberies happen. You couldn't have known. I know that in my head, Zara admitted. But my heart still wonders if I should have fought harder to stay in Chicago. And if you had, Thomas might still be sickly. He's thriving here, Zara. Whatever else happened, you made the right choice for your boy. His words eased something in her soul that had been knotted with guilt for weeks. They sat together until the night air grew too cold, and then Caleb walked her to the door, his hand warm at the small of her back. Good night, Zara, he said, touching the brim of his hat in a gesture that had become familiar and dear. Good night, Caleb, she replied, lingering a moment longer than necessary before going inside. The next day brought an unexpected visitor to the Triple Diamond, Sheriff Larson from Pine Ridge, with news about the stagecoach robbery. Caught 2 of the bandits trying to sell your husband's pocket watch in Butte, he informed Zara as they sat in the Thorntons' parlor. They'll stand trial next month. Thought you might want to be there. Did they say anything about the others? Charles Thornton asked. Said there were 3 more, headed for Canada last they knew. We've got descriptions, telegraphed them to the territorial marshals. The sheriff turned back to Zara. Madam, we recovered some of your belongings. He indicated a small trunk he'd brought with him. Not much, I'm afraid, but there are some papers that might be important. The trunk contained Gregory's correspondence about the land purchase, some family photographs, Zara's wedding ring which the robbers had overlooked, and a small leather-bound Bible. Simple things, but they represented a connection to the life they'd left behind, and Zara thanked the sheriff with tears in her eyes. Will you attend the trial? Adelaide asked after the sheriff had gone. Zara looked out the window to where Thomas was helping Caleb repair a section of fence, handing him nails with solemn concentration. I should. For Gregory's sake. We'll accompany you, Charles offered. It's only right. But when Zara mentioned the trial to Thomas that night, his reaction surprised her. Do we have to go, Mama? He asked, his voice small. I don't want to leave the ranch. What about my riding lessons? What about Clover and Daisy? What about Caleb? It would only be for a few days, Zara explained. And Caleb and the horses will be here when we get back. Thomas's lower lip trembled. Promise? The question gave her pause. They hadn't discussed how long they would stay at the Triple Diamond, or what would happen after Thomas was fully recovered. The boy had formed attachments here to the place, the animals, and most of all to Caleb. Disrupting those attachments, even temporarily, clearly frightened him. "I promise," she said, making the decision in that moment. They would return to the ranch after the trial, and she would give serious thought to Charles's suggestion about Gregory's land. Perhaps they could build a life here after all. The trial was set for mid-September in the county seat, a 2-day journey from the Triple Diamond. As the date approached, Zara found herself growing anxious about leaving, though for reasons different from Thomas's. She had grown comfortable with the rhythm of ranch life, with Adelaide's friendship, and especially with Caleb's steady presence. The night before their departure, Caleb sought her out after Thomas was asleep. "Thought you might like this for the journey," he said, holding out a small leather pouch. "It's not much, but it might come in handy." Inside was a beautifully crafted hunting knife with a bone handle. "For protection," Caleb explained. "Though I expect Charles and the sheriff will look after you plenty well." Zara ran her finger along the smooth handle. "Thank you. I've never owned a knife before." "Every frontier woman should have one," Caleb said. "Not just for protection, but it's useful for all manner of things." She looked up at him, suddenly aware of how close they were standing in the dim hallway. "Will you be here when we return? Thomas is worried you might be gone." "Just Thomas?" Caleb asked, his voice dropping lower. Zara's heart quickened. "No," she admitted. "Not just Thomas." Caleb's hand came up to touch her cheek, rough calluses gentle against her skin. "I'll be here, Zara. I promise you that." The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken feelings. Then, from Thomas's room came a small cough, breaking the spell. Caleb stepped back, his hand dropping to his side. "You should get some rest. It's a long journey tomorrow." Zara nodded, clutching the knife pouch to her chest. "Good night, Caleb." "Good night, Zara. Safe travels." The journey to the county seat was uneventful, if tiring. Thomas bore it well, his increased strength evident in how much better he handled the long hours in the wagon compared to their earlier travels. The trial itself was brief. The evidence against the captured bandits was overwhelming, and they were sentenced to 15 years in the territorial prison. Zara testified about the robbery and Gregory's murder, her voice steady as she recounted the terrible events. When it was over, she felt a curious sense of closure. Justice had been served, at least partially, and now she could focus on building a future for herself and Thomas. On the journey back to the Triple Diamond, Charles broached the subject of her plans. "Have you given any thought to what you'll do next?" he asked as they made camp on the first night. "The offer to help you build on Gregory's land still stands." Zara watched Thomas charming one of the ranch hands into letting him help tend the horses. "I've been thinking about it a great deal. The land is good, and it would provide security for Thomas's future. But—" Charles prompted, hearing the hesitation in her voice. "But building a homestead from scratch is daunting, even with help. And Thomas has grown so attached to the ranch, to the people there." She paused. "To Caleb." Charles nodded thoughtfully. "Caleb's a good man. Been with us for 8 years now. Came to us broken in spirit after the war, but he found healing in the work, in the land." He gave Zara a knowing look. "He's never taken to anyone the way he has to you and Thomas." Heat rose in Zara's cheeks. "He's been very kind." "Kindness is Caleb's nature," Charles agreed. "But what he feels for you two goes beyond kindness, if you don't mind my saying so." The conversation left Zara with much to consider. By the time they crested the final hill overlooking the Triple Diamond 2 days later, she had made her decision. Thomas spotted Caleb first, waiting on horseback at the edge of the ranch property. "Look, Mama! Caleb came to meet us." Caleb rode alongside their wagon as they approached the ranch, Thomas chattering excitedly about the trial and the journey. When they reached the main house, Caleb lifted Thomas from the wagon and swung him around before setting him on his feet. "Missed you, little cowboy," he said, tousling the boy's hair. "Clover's been mighty lonesome without you. Can I go see her?" "Please, Mama?" Thomas begged. Zara nodded, and Thomas raced off toward the corral, leaving her alone with Caleb. "Welcome back," he said, offering his hand to help her down from the wagon. When her feet touched the ground, he didn't immediately release her hand. "Everything go all right?" "Yes," she said. "The men were convicted. The others haven't been found yet, but the sheriff is hopeful." Caleb nodded, his eyes searching her face. "And now?" Zara understood the question beneath the question. "Now I need to make decisions about our future. Mr. Thornton has been very generous with his offers of help." "He's a good man," Caleb agreed, a flicker of something disappointment crossing his face before he masked it. "Whatever you decide, I'm sure it'll be what's best for you and Thomas." "I hope so," Zara said softly. "I was wondering if I might speak with you privately later. There are some things I'd like to discuss." Hope replaced the earlier disappointment in Caleb's eyes. "Of course. Any time." That evening, after Thomas was settled with Adelaide for a promised game of checkers, Zara met Caleb by the corral. The setting sun painted the mountains in shades of gold and purple, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of pine from the nearby forest. "I've been thinking about Gregory's land," Zara began, watching Clover nuzzle Thomas's pockets for treats through the window of the main house. "It's good land," Caleb said neutrally. "Close to town, with a creek running through it." "Yes. Mr. Thornton thinks I could build a comfortable home there, lease most of the acreage to neighboring ranchers." "He's right. You'd be secure, independent." Zara turned to face him fully. "But we'd be alone, Thomas and I. I'd have to hire help for anything beyond what I could manage myself. Thomas would have no one to guide him as he grows, to teach him to be a man." Caleb's hands tightened on the corral fence. "What are you saying, Zara?" "I'm saying that Thomas needs more than just a piece of land. He needs stability, guidance. He needs someone who sees his potential, not just his limitations." She took a deep breath. "He needs you, Caleb." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with implications Zara wasn't sure she was ready to voice more explicitly. "And what about you?" Caleb asked, his voice rough with emotion. "What do you need, Zara?" It was the same question he'd asked her weeks ago, but this time, Zara had an answer. "I need a partner," she said simply. "Someone I can trust, someone who respects my mind and my heart. Someone who understands that Thomas and I come as a pair, and loves us both." Caleb's hand reached for hers, enveloping it in warmth. "I do, you know. Love you both." The admission, so plainly stated, made Zara's heart soar. "I know. I've seen it in how you are with him, in 1,000 small kindnesses to me. I never thought to speak of it so soon after your loss," Caleb said. "Didn't want you to think I was taking advantage of your situation. You've been nothing but honorable," Zara assured him. "But life on the frontier doesn't always allow for the traditional mourning periods we observe back east. Gregory would want Thomas to have a father figure, and me to have companionship." Caleb drew her closer, his other hand coming up to brush a strand of hair from her face. "I don't have much to offer beyond my hands and my heart, Zara. I've saved some money over the years, but I don't own land of my own." "I have land," Zara reminded him with a smile. "What I need is someone who knows how to make it flourish." Understanding dawned in Caleb's eyes. "Are you proposing a partnership, Mrs. Henderson?" "I believe I am, Mr. Ward," Zara replied, her voice steady despite the racing of her heart. "A partnership in all things, if you're amenable." Caleb's smile was slow and sure. "I need to court you proper first. Do things in the right order." "I'd like that," Zara said softly. "And Thomas? Have you spoken to him about this?" "Not specifically," Zara admitted. "But he adores you, Caleb. I think he'd be overjoyed." As if summoned by their discussion, Thomas appeared at the main house door, waving excitedly. "Caleb! Mama! Mrs. Thornton says I can have a cookie if you say it's all right." Caleb laughed, the sound rich and warm in the evening air. What do you say, Mama? Has the young cowboy earned a cookie today? The casual use of Mama, the easy way he included her in the decision, the affection in his voice when he called Thomas a cowboy, all of it confirmed for Zara that she was making the right choice. I think he has, she called back, and Thomas disappeared inside with a whoop of delight. He's getting stronger every day, Caleb observed. Soon enough he'll be riding Clover without me leading her. Because of you, Zara said. You saw past his weakness to the strong boy underneath. Caleb shook his head. The strength was always there. He just needed someone to believe in it. He squeezed her hand gently. Same as his mama. The courtship that followed was proper but swift, as was often the case on the frontier where practical considerations outweighed social conventions. Caleb moved from the bunkhouse to a small cabin on the edge of the ranch property, visiting Zara and Thomas daily but maintaining a respectful distance that satisfied propriety. They rode out to Gregory's land together, Thomas seated proudly on Clover between them. The property was even more beautiful than Gregory's letters had described, a gentle slope with views of the mountains, a clear creek providing water, and enough flat land for a substantial house and outbuildings. We could put the house there, Caleb suggested, pointing to a spot sheltered by a stand of pines. Barn and corrals down by the creek. Good pasture for horses. Horses? Thomas asked excitedly. Our own horses? Can't have a ranch without horses, son, Caleb said, the endearment flowing naturally now. We'll start with a few, build up a small herd over time. And cattle too? Thomas pressed. Caleb glanced at Zara, including her in the decision. Maybe a few to start. What do you think, Zara? The question encompassed so much more than just livestock. It was about the kind of life they would build together, the legacy they would create for Thomas. I think it sounds perfect, she said, and the smile Caleb gave her warmed her to her toes. That night, after Thomas was asleep, Caleb proposed properly, with a small silver ring he'd purchased on his last trip to town. It's not fancy, he apologized, but I can get you something better when the ranch is established. It's perfect, Zara assured him, letting him slide it onto her finger. I don't need fancy, Caleb. I just need you. They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the Triple Diamond, with the Thorntons standing as witnesses and Thomas proudly serving as ring-bearer. Adelaide had helped Zara sew a new dress of pale blue cotton, and Caleb wore a clean shirt and necktie borrowed from Charles. I now pronounce you husband and wife, the traveling preacher declared, and Caleb kissed Zara with a tenderness that promised a lifetime of care. After the ceremony, as guests enjoyed the wedding supper Adelaide had prepared, Caleb knelt down to Thomas's level. Thomas, I want you to know that I'm not trying to replace your father, he said seriously. Gregory will always be your pa. But I hope you'll let me be a father to you too, in my own way. Thomas considered this with the solemnity of a child who had seen more of life's hardships than most his age. Will you still teach me to ride and rope and all the cowboy things? Every day, Caleb promised. And whatever else you want to learn. And you'll take care of Mama and make her smile? That's my most important job, Caleb said, glancing up at Zara with such love that her heart nearly burst. Thomas nodded, satisfied. Then I think it's all right if I call you Pa. My first Pa is in heaven, but you can be my Pa here. Caleb's eyes glistened with unshed tears as he pulled Thomas into a hug. I'd be honored, son. More than you know. Work on their new home began immediately, with help from the Triple Diamond hands and neighboring ranchers who understood the importance of community in the harsh frontier environment. Caleb proved to be as skilled with a hammer and saw as he was with horses, directing the construction with a clear vision of what their home should be. By late October, the main structure was complete, a sturdy 4-room house with a stone fireplace and large windows to capture the mountain views. They moved in just before the first snow, bringing with them wedding gifts from the Thorntons and their neighbors, quilts and curtains, pots and pans, a rocking chair for the porch, and a small herd of 10 cattle to start their ranch. Thomas had his own room for the first time in his life, decorated with the wooden horses Caleb had carved for him and a special shelf for his growing collection of books about the West. Each night, Caleb would read to him before bed, patiently helping him sound out the difficult words when it was Thomas's turn to read. "Pa," Thomas asked one snowy evening as Caleb tucked him in, "when will I be strong enough to help with the real ranch work?" "You're already helping," Caleb reminded him. "Those eggs you collected today fed us all breakfast. But I mean the big work. Like branding cattle and breaking horses." Caleb sat on the edge of the bed, giving the question the serious consideration it deserved. "Well, you're already strong enough to ride Clover without help. I reckon by spring you'll be ready to help with the calving. And if you keep growing like you have been, you'll be helping with Roundup before you know it." Thomas nodded, satisfied with this assessment. "Mama says I've grown 2 inches since we came to Montana." "At least," Caleb agreed. "Your mama had to let down the hems of your trousers twice already." "Is that why Mama's sewing all those little clothes? Because I'm growing too fast?" Caleb chuckled, realizing that Thomas had noticed Zara's secret project. "No, son. Those clothes aren't for you. Your mama and I have been meaning to tell you something important." "What is it?" Thomas asked, sitting up in bed. "How would you feel about being a big brother come spring?" Thomas's eyes widened. "Mama's going to have a baby?" "That's right. You'll have a little brother or sister to look after, to teach all the things you know about horses and the ranch." "A real baby?" Thomas clarified, his face serious. "One that's ours forever, not just visiting?" "Forever and always," Caleb confirmed. "Just like you're ours forever." Thomas flung his arms around Caleb's neck. "I hope it's a brother. Girls don't like horses as much." "Don't let your mama hear you say that." Caleb laughed, returning the hug. "She rides almost as well as I do now." Later, as Caleb and Zara sat before the fire in their small but comfortable living room, he told her about Thomas's reaction. "He's so excited," Caleb said, his hand resting on Zara's still flat stomach. "Already planning all the things he'll teach the baby. I was worried he might feel replaced," Zara admitted. "After being the center of our world for so long. That boy has enough love in his heart for 10 siblings," Caleb assured her. "And he knows how much we love him." Zara leaned against her husband's shoulder, watching the flames dance in the hearth. Outside, snow fell softly on their new home, on the barn where their small but growing herd of livestock sheltered, on the land that would support their family for generations to come. "When I first saw you on that trail," Caleb said quietly, "carrying Thomas like he was the most precious thing in the world, I never imagined we'd be here now." "Neither did I," Zara confessed. "I was so focused on survival that I couldn't see a future beyond the next day. And now?" She smiled, taking his hand and placing it where she could feel the slight roundness beginning to form. "Now I see a lifetime. Thomas growing strong, our baby healthy, our ranch prospering. Our family," Caleb said, the wonder of it still fresh in his voice. "Our family," Zara agreed, and kissed him as the snow continued to fall, blanketing their new beginning in pristine white. Spring came to Montana in a rush of green, the land awakening from its winter slumber with an explosion of wildflowers and new growth. Thomas, true to Caleb's prediction, proved to be an enthusiastic helper during calving season, his once frail body now sturdy and tanned from hours in the sun. "Look, Pa!" he called one bright April morning, pointing to a newborn calf taking its first wobbling steps. "That's the one I helped deliver." Caleb, watching from the corral fence, nodded with pride. "You did good work, son. Steadiest hands I've seen in a boy your age." Thomas beamed at the praise, his chest puffing out beneath his miniature version of Caleb's work shirt. At nearly 6, he was tall for his age, with none of the weakness that had once defined him. The scarlet fever had left no lasting effects besides a slight tendency to tire more quickly than other children, a limitation he fought against with determination and grit. "Can I name this one?" Thomas asked, approaching the mother cow and calf cautiously. "Sure thing." "What are you thinking?" Thomas considered the question seriously. Starlight, because she was born under the stars last night. Starlight it is, Caleb agreed, making a note in the small book where he kept track of their growing herd. Now come on up to the house. Your mama's been asking for you. Zara was in the rocking chair on the porch when they approached, her hands resting on her rounded belly, her face serene despite the discomfort of late pregnancy. She smiled as Thomas bounded up the steps to show her the calf tally from the morning's work. 7 new calves, he announced proudly. And I helped with 3 of them. That's wonderful, Zara said, ruffling his hair. You're becoming quite the rancher. Just like Pa, Thomas agreed, leaning against Caleb's side as the man settled on the porch step beside Zara's chair. Your mama helped birth 2 calves herself last week, Caleb reminded him. Before I convinced her to start taking it easier. Zara laughed. I'm not an invalid, Caleb. Women have been having babies while working since the beginning of time. Not my wife, Caleb said firmly, though his eyes twinkled. Not when we have plenty of help and a comfortable home for you to rest in. The plenty of help included a young widow named Martha who rode over from a neighboring homestead 3 times a week to assist with cooking and cleaning, and 2 steady ranch hands Caleb had hired as their operation expanded. The Triple Diamond hands still helped during busy seasons like calving and branding, but the Henderson Ranch, now officially named the Starlight Ranch after Thomas's first named calf, was becoming self-sufficient. The baby's kicking, Zara said suddenly, taking Thomas's hand and placing it on her belly. Feel that? I think your brother or sister is eager to meet you. Thomas's eyes widened as he felt the movement beneath his palm. Wow! Is it a boy or a girl, Mama? We won't know until the baby arrives, Zara reminded him. But that should be soon now. How soon? Thomas pressed. Any day, Caleb answered, exchanging a knowing look with Zara. The midwife from Pine Ridge had visited yesterday and confirmed that the baby was positioned correctly and could come at any time. Will I have to go stay with Mrs. Thornton again? Thomas asked, referring to the arrangement they'd discussed for when Zara went into labor. No need, Caleb assured him. Adelaide is coming here to help when the time comes. You can stay in your room, and I'll keep you informed about everything. Thomas nodded, satisfied with this plan. After the initial excitement of feeling the baby kick, his attention quickly returned to ranch matters. Can we check on Clover's foal after lunch, Pa? I want to see if she's trying to stand yet. We sure can, Caleb promised. That little filly's going to be yours to train when she's ready, remember? I remember. I'm going to name her Twilight, to match her mama and Starlight. As Thomas chattered about his plans for the foal, Zara caught Caleb's eye over the boy's head, her expression soft with contentment. This was the life she'd never dared to imagine when she'd arrived in Montana, not just surviving, but thriving, with a family that grew stronger together with each passing day. The baby, a girl they named Catherine Adelaide Henderson, arrived 2 days later during a gentle spring rain. Thomas, true to his role as big brother, took his responsibilities seriously from the first moment he laid eyes on his sister. She's so tiny, he whispered, peering into the blanket-wrapped bundle in Zara's arms. Was I that small? Even smaller, Zara told him, her face radiant despite the exhaustion of labor. You were born early, remember? But you grew strong, just like Catherine will. I'll teach her everything, Thomas promised solemnly. How to ride and rope and name the stars. I'm counting on it, Caleb said, his arm around Thomas's shoulders, his other hand gently touching his daughter's downy head. Every girl should know how to do those things, especially a ranch girl. As Catherine grew from infant to toddler, it became clear that the Henderson family was blessed with 2 remarkable children. Where Thomas was thoughtful and methodical, Catherine was fearless and impulsive. By her 2nd birthday, she was already attempting to climb onto Clover's back whenever Thomas wasn't looking, determined to ride like her brother. She's going to give us gray hairs before she's 5, Caleb predicted one evening, watching Catherine chase fireflies in the yard while Thomas patiently built her a small corral of twigs for her wooden horses. "She has your spirit," Zara observed, leaning against her husband's shoulder as they sat on the porch swing he built for her last birthday. "And your determination," Caleb countered with a smile. "Remember how you insisted on learning to ride astride instead of side saddle, even though all the other women in the county were scandalized?" "Practicality over propriety," Zara said with a laugh. "Besides, how else could I help with Roundup?" The ranch had prospered beyond their early hopes. The original 10 cattle had multiplied to a herd of over 100, and Caleb's eye for horseflesh had resulted in a small but quality breeding operation that produced mounts sought after throughout the territory. They'd added on to the house twice, first a kitchen and dining room large enough for community gatherings, then 2 more bedrooms as their family grew. 3 years after Catherine's birth, Zara had given birth to twin boys, Charles and Gregory, named for the 2 men who had shaped their family's destiny. Now, with Thomas approaching his 10th birthday and the twins learning to walk, the Henderson home was filled with the joyful chaos of a growing family. "Thomas asked me yesterday if we could send him to school in Pine Ridge," Caleb mentioned as they watched their children play in the lengthening shadows of evening. "Says he wants to learn more than we can teach him here at home." Zara nodded thoughtfully. "Martha mentioned that they're building a proper schoolhouse in town. It would be good for him to be around other children his age. That's what I told him. Said we'd discuss it as a family." Caleb squeezed her hand. "He's growing up so fast, Zara. Sometimes I look at him and still see that frail boy you were carrying when we first met. And sometimes I look at him and see the man he's becoming," Zara said softly. "Thanks to you, Caleb. You gave him more than riding lessons. You gave him confidence, purpose. We gave him that," Caleb corrected gently. "Together." Thomas looked up then, waving them over to see the elaborate ranch he and Catherine had constructed out of twigs, pebbles, and wildflowers. As Caleb and Zara crossed the yard to admire their children's creation, Zara reflected on the journey that had brought them here. She had come to Montana carrying a son who was weak, fleeing tragedy and facing an uncertain future. Instead of hardship, she had found healing. Instead of isolation, she had found community. And in Caleb, she had found a partner who saw strength where others saw only limitation, who had taught her son to ride and called him son with a love that matched any blood relation. "Look, Mama, Pa!" Thomas called, pointing to the small stick figure he placed on a pebble horse at the center of the play ranch. "That's me when I grow up and run Starlight Ranch. And that's me," Catherine added, pointing to another figure nearby. "I'm the best rider in Montana. What about Pa and me?" Zara asked, kneeling beside them despite her dress. Thomas pointed to 2 more figures standing close together near a twig house. "You're watching over everything, making sure we're all right. Just like you always do." Caleb's hand found Zara's shoulder, squeezing gently as they both took in their son's words, simple but profound in their understanding of family. "That's right, son," Caleb said, his voice rich with emotion. "That's what family does. Watches over each other, helps each other grow strong. Even when we start out weak?" Thomas asked, a flash of memory from his earlier childhood crossing his face. "Especially then," Zara assured him, drawing him into a hug that soon included Catherine and Caleb as well. "Because it's not about how we start, but about how far we go together." As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple over the ranch they'd built together, Zara knew with absolute certainty that they had gone far indeed and had many more miles yet to travel, side by side, strong in the love that had transformed them all.